So I recently got a PB on a Real World, um, and I got 27, which is pretty on par with some of the highest streaks out there. Geotips and Plunkett third place are both 28, so I was actually finished one off of the third place on both the leaderboards. Um, yeah, so I'm just gonna go through each of the rounds and try to explain the reasoning. Um, Hopefully shed some light on a bigger streak. Yeah, and also this is the first round, so I didn't realize my streak counter wasn't working, so I added a streak and counter in the bottom left in iMovie. But this first round, with these sort of like I think they're called poplar trees, um, immediately reminded me of Chile. Along with this like winery, like the area in Santiago has tons of wineries, and the sun is north, so we're in the southern hemisphere, so that fits for that area. So I zoom in on Chile, but I realize it could be Argentina as well. And I look at the car, and the plate doesn't look Chilean to me. As well as the poles don't necessarily seem the normal Chile poles that have the divot in them. So I just send Argentina since I'm on a zero streak and don't think too much about it. And it does end up being and a lot of those poplar trees are in the Mendoza area, so I end up getting pretty close in that round because I guess they're Mendoza. Okay, this round is Cambodia. The reason for that is it's like this like wet swampy area with these random trees. Super common landscape in Cambodia. We also have this back of the car, which I think is in Cambodia, maybe Brazil and Mexico. But in terms of Asia, you're only gonna find this in Cambodia, so it couldn't have been Thailand, which is basically the other thing you consider. And also, I didn't zoom on them, but these poles down here are the classic Cambodian poles with like the squares at the top, but they're pretty like just narrow circular. Then they don't look like the Brazil or Mexico ones, so you pretty much can rule out Latin America. So I went Cambodia, and I ended up going more near Thailand, or yeah, because in terms of the capital, because the dirt was redder. Okay, here we have kind of just like tropical hills, like not very piney. With this dirt road. Um, and it just strikes me as Philippines, just kind of somewhere because these plants, like with these sort of leaves here, are super Asian. Um, you see them a lot in Thailand. But this doesn't look like Thailand because the dirt is too white. We also have a white car, so I just sent Philippines. It's also a pretty short streak, so I don't spend that much time on it. Um, yeah, so that's three. This is four. This sort of wooden pole. You see a lot, like sort of poles made out of wood in both like U.S. and Canada, as well as like Greece. Um, but the sort of trees fit for like Appalachia and the hills. They aren't like steep mountains like the West Coast, so I think I guess West Virginia. And it doesn't seem the trees are too like thick for it to be Canada because they would be skinnier if it was Canada, so I can rule out Canada that way. So I guess West Virginia. I think it's Pennsylvania. Yeah. So not the worst guess there. Here we have Black Car, which is pretty interesting because you could maybe this looks pretty similar to that Philippines round. But since we have Black Car, it cannot be the Philippines. And honestly, I don't think there's too many clues here on where it is, but kind of just using process of elimination, it is Indonesia. Um, because you don't get locations like this in Malaysia. It's too dry. And like it just doesn't. You can't get a black car in Thailand. So like unless it's South America, which it just feels Asian to me. It has to be one of these like I was pretty sure it was one of these islands. It kind of feels that way with like the drier like hilly landscape. You get a lot in that area, but it actually ends up being Sulawesi, which is kind of surprising to me. So that's five. Um, for six here, we have oil palms, which are super common in peninsular Malaysia as well as Indonesia, and a little bit in Thailand. But I basically rule out Thailand because the road doesn't really feel Thai. Usually at concrete roads or dirt roads in Thailand. And same way in Indonesia, you usually get dirt roads. You don't usually get roads paved this nicely. And if they're paved like this, they usually have like a road line on them in Indonesia. So I end up going peninsular Malaysia, and it does end up being there, I think. Yeah, it ends up being near the coast. Okay, here we have the biggest hint. Sorry. We have this sort of trees that feel very like classic like Amazonian Brazil. Like you get these in Acre a lot. near the Peru border. However, I know it's not Brazil because of these chevrons on the guardrail, which are the type you get in Peru, um, and Bolivia actually. Well, Bolivia ones are a little different, but these are the Peru ones. And with this sort of landscape, it has to be like the Amazon part of Peru. So I guess on 30C, this road down here, but it ends up being more near Pucallpa. So, but I got the right general feel for the country. Here we have white center lines and yellow outside lines, which means it's one of the four countries in southern Africa that have street view. And since we have this sort of like blur on the car, you only get that in Botswana. And also, I mean, other countries that have lines like this are in the Middle East, but this feels doesn't feel like the Middle East because of the trees and shrubs. If it was the Middle East desert, it would just be desert and not have all those plants on it. So I knew it was in either Botswana, South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini. And since we have like also Botswana has a lot of this sand on the side of the road. Um so I knew it was Botswana. And my gut just said it was northeast and it ends up being in that kind of in that area. Um so here kind of open highway in the middle of nowhere with the yellow center line. Um Immediately strikes me as either a rural US or rural Canada. However, I don't know what sort of plant. I think it's mustard, wild mustard. One sec. This sort of yellow, wild, I think it's wild mustard. I'm not sure, but you see this a lot in Saskatchewan. Um, Another hint I got is this car glitch. Sometimes it happens on the Google car. It's much more common in Canada. You can get it in the US, but it's usually Canada when it happens. But really, this yellow plant, I almost always go Saskatchewan when I see it. And then another tip I learned, I think, after this video is these white little dashes every once in a while on the road are something you get in Saskatchewan a lot. Um, so I actually think it's 100% of the time you see that it's Saskatchewan. So okay, so recently Google removed a lot of the coverage, which makes locations glitch out and repeat the last one. Um, so when that happens, you just count it as you just guess somewhere else and keep the streak at where it was. So the streak stays at 9 here, and I keep on going because whatever country it actually was not displayed. Okay, here we have the cameras lower to the ground, which you get in Switzerland and Japan, and you have the white bollard. I think it's the German bollard, but you actually get it in Switzerland and Luxembourg as well. And since we have the low camera, it has to be Switzerland. And I mean the steep mountains fit as well for Switzerland. Here, it's kind of the middle of nowhere. Looks pretty north. Do have this car though with the black car with the long antenna, which is in a few countries, like Spain, Israel, Russia, and Taiwan, I think. Trying to think if there's any others. I think that's it. Um, However, the only country that really fits out of those would be Russia. But this ends up actually being Kamchatka. Kamchatka has these long dirt, like they're not really highways, but just roads, wide and dirt roads, that seem to stretch on forever, and it's kind of hilly, super common in Kamchatka, and it does end up being there. So we're on 10. This one actually kind of looks similar to that Argentina round, but it's not Argentina. We have that stubby antenna, which is a clue. We also have these like trees planted on the side of the road, which you see a lot near Christchurch in New Zealand in that area. And as well as I kind of looked at it earlier, I saw in the distance this thing right here is a baller that looks like the New Zealand one. So I was pretty sure this is New Zealand because you can get the short antenna there as well. So I just go near Christchurch, and it ends up being quite a bit more south. Okay, here we have white and yellow outside lines again, and it doesn't look like the desert, so it's gonna be in southern Africa. But we also have the Gen 2 camera by the Halo. So I know it's South Africa because that's the only country with Generation 2 camera in South Africa. I end up guessing on the road. I don't know what road number it is, but it's this east-west road because I know that east-west road has these really bright white yellow lines. And I was trying to see if that was there, but it ends up being more south, which makes more sense because that area is more dry than where it actually is. So that's 13. For round 14, we have these metal roofs, which was a hint to me. It reminded me of Indonesia, as well as the stilted houses, which you see in Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, pretty much anywhere where it floods a lot. This poll was super weird. I ignored it. Kind of threw me off for a second. We also have Generation 4 camera, which rules out some countries like the Philippines, Cambodia. So basically, and it looks too tropical to be Thailand, because most Thailand has like redder dirt and not as many palm trees everywhere. A little drier. So I was deciding between Malaysia and Indonesia here. But since we have Generation 4, it's much more common in Indonesia, and I don't recognize the pole. But also the metal roof is more common in Indonesia than Malaysia, especially I think in Borneo and maybe Sulawesi, but especially Borneo. I'm not sure where this actually was. Did I guess Sulawesi? It was actually, yeah, it was actually Central Java, but pretty sure Central Java doesn't usually have metal roofs, but I'm not sure. But in the end, it was Indonesia, so I got the country right. And that's 14. It would have been 15 without the glitched location. Here we have a rural location with like sort of pine trees on the dirt road, with Generation 2 camera. Um, Generation 2 camera you don't get in the US. So this is basically Canada or Scandinavia to me. You also don't get it in Russia, so it's like Canada, Scandinavia with this sort of very northern landscape. Um, Norway and Sweden, you don't usually get Gen 2. It's usually Finland, so it kind of fits best for Finland as well as out of the Scandinavian countries. Norway and Sweden usually have paved roads, and Finland has dirt roads. So really, it comes down between Finland and Canada. But one of the easiest ways to tell them apart is Finland almost always has like single lane roads, really narrow ones. Meanwhile, Canada's gonna be 2 lane. They're gonna be much wider. So this is pretty easy Finland for me. Also, the dirt has a slight reddish tint, which you get on the western side of Finland, near the water, near the islands, um, or on islands actually. Um, so I didn't guess there, but I realized after I guessed that that's probably what's going on here. It's this little island over here, west of Ulu. And we get another glitch location. This is the last one. It ends up the real location was in Malaysia, but it didn't load in properly, so you don't count it for the streak. Here, this is actually a repeat from a long time ago. And I remember I think I went Thailand on it, and I was wrong. I was trying to remember what it was. Um, I actually remember thinking it was Generation 4 camera when it wasn't. Um, but basically, let's see if I pan to something good here. It's like pretty tropical, right? And it feels very Asian. I don't know what these plants are, but they remind me of Asia. The big thing is these hills with the palm trees on them. Classic Philippines landscape. Philippines always is hilly with palm trees on the hills. Most of the time you don't get like tons of palm trees on hills in Indonesia and Malaysia. So kind of just fit for Philippines. Yeah. And Luzon, a lot of times has these like flatter areas with the mountains, so that's why I went Luzon, but it was not actually Luzon. Okay, this has you can see the Google car here looks different. Um, but this was gettable without the Google car. It's a super dry landscape with these very short shrubs. It's very classic UAE. UAE, other parts of UAE usually have bigger hills, but this is actually I think it's called Sir Bunyards. Let's see, island, Sir Bunias Island. It's this Google car is specific to that island, so you can always tell it apart by that. There's actually quite a few locations on this island on a rural world, so it's pretty useful to remember. And it's pretty unique, so it's not hard to forget. Alright, here we're kind of in a road in the middle of nowhere, with an antenna. And since we have a antenna, we know it's not most likely not U.S. or Canada. It's probably somewhere in Europe. But there's a couple things here. The trees feel kind of northern. It doesn't feel like Mediterranean per se. Besides that, it's not the biggest help. But there's also this purplish color road. It's kind of like purple asphalt. It's not. It's obviously not purple purple, but it has a purplish tint to it. You get that a lot in Poland. Um, Also, I think the U.S. kind of uses similar asphalt sometimes, as well as Slovenia. But this feels, since the road's wide and flat, it feels most like Poland. And I wasn't too sure, but it ends up being Poland. So that's 18. Um, and then we go on to 19. We have sort of these eucalyptus trees, classic Australia tree. If you know anything about Australia, it's usually eucalyptus. I look down the road, and I see the sign is on the left, which means we're driving on the left side of the road. So it confirms it should be Australia. And since it's so dense, I think it's Tasmania, and it was not. So it's kind of too flat for Tasmania now I look back at it. Here we have this concrete road and this sort of like hilly landscape and yellow lines. And since we have yellow lines, we know we're pretty much in the Americas. The concrete road you see a lot in Ecuador. And my first thought this was Ecuador, but there's a couple hints that give away that this isn't Ecuador. One, usually you have like white little sticks on the side of the road in Ecuador, with a red thing on it. It's the Ecuador bollard. You don't see any here, and because we're in Colombia, and Colombia doesn't really have bollards. Um, but since there are no bollards, it's more likely to be Colombia. I look at the car. You can barely make out there might be partially black, especially by the blur. And Colombia has black car, but Ecuador does not. So that also points to Colombia. And then you this sign here is broken, but it looks like it has a white post, which is another thing that Colombia has a lot, as well as these green rolling hills fit for Colombia. So end up guessing near I think Medellin or Southwest because I've seen a lot of concrete roads in this area specifically, but I don't know if that's actually really a good meta to trust on. It ends up being east of Medellin. So yeah, here we have a car that's like not white or black. It looks almost grayish. Pretty sure the only countries with like a grayish car are Philippines and Baton, but I'm not sure about that. I'm pretty sure about that. I zoom down. We have this very stick pole, pretty generic looking pole, but it's not a Thai pole. It's not really Indo pole. It fits for the Philippines. And we again have these mountains with the palm trees on them. You don't really see those in other countries, like steep, rugged hills with just normal palm trees on them, as well as the whitish soil kind of rules out Thailand, Cambodia, for the most part. So I end up going Philippines again. I just hedge near the middle and ends up being Davao or Mindanao. Okay, here we have white lines, all white lines, and you can tell by the back of the car. One sec. You can tell by this antenna. The antenna is on the back of the car, so we know we're driving left. So that rules out most of the world. And we have reddish dirt. It's pretty much everything here points to Australia. But since we don't have like the big eucalyptus trees I saw in that earlier round, and we have these like kind of skinny, leafy trees. It means we're more in the northern part of the country than the southern part. I'm not sure where I end up going, but honestly, I feel like this could be anywhere from like Western Australia to Queensland, this sort of ring. But I don't actually, I'm not that good at Australia, so I just guess Northern Territories, and it was actually Northern Territories. So yeah, near Darwin. Here we kind of have a road in the middle of nowhere. The poles look, don't I don't recognize them, but they seem Soviet of some sort. But particularly Russia. Russia has like the most diverse poles out of those countries, so I think it could be Russia. And most of the countries in Eastern Europe don't have like roads this long and like well developed for looks like going nowhere. Usually there's like curves, signs. There's really nothing here. It's like literally in the middle of nowhere, just a road. For that reason, it's almost certainly Russia. Um, so yeah, it ends up being really close to the Ukraine border. But that's 23. So for 24 here, it's again Botswana. We have this similar like sandy soil, which is good for Botswana. It's kind of African looking tree here. It doesn't fit for the Middle East, because the Middle East wouldn't have these trees here. It'd be more drier. And again, Botswana has this weird car blur sometimes, and the other countries, South Africa, do not. So we know this isn't South Africa, but honestly, South Africa doesn't get this dry. So it has to be somewhere in Botswana. I wasn't too sure where. Do I end up guessing more north? I felt like it might have been a national park, but it wasn't. Okay, here, um, we have car meta, but I didn't necessarily need it. That is the Bangladesh car, so it confirmed everything. But Bangladesh has these long, again, straight roads. Usually there's tuk-tuks on it. It's very like swampy. It's kind of hard to explain, but it just feels like Bangladesh, if I'm being honest. So I just click in the center. I wasn't too sure where it was. A lot of Bangladesh looks very similar. So here we have Generation 4 camera and the yellow line. Yellow line pretty much means, and you can tell this is the front of the car because that's where and also this guy's driving right, so we know we're driving right, so we know it's not Thailand. Pretty much the yellow line countries are all the Americas, and the only place in the Americas with Gen 4 are like the US, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. But this is too like tropical. It's not really tropical, but it's not like piney, like the US or Canada. So it's either Argentina, Mexico, or Brazil. I wasn't. I was leaning Mexico initially. The thing that really seals it is this pole in the distance here. It kind of looks like a cross almost with like little hands. Kind of a weird way to put it, but it's a very common Mexico pole. It's not the Brazil pole that has the ladders in it, or the Argentina poles that are like the A, look like an A with like lines through it. Um, and the landscape kind of fits for like southern Mexico, not the desert part. So I end up guessing Mexico. The thing that threw me off there was that one thing that threw me off here is these mountains. You don't see like really like hills like this in Mexico that much. Much more in drier part of Brazil. But I still go Mexico based off the pole and kind of the overall feel of it. I think it ends going, yeah, ends up being in Chiapas. I feel like anywhere in this region it could be, especially this region, but it ends up being in this little valley here, and that kind of makes sense with the hills because normally this part's completely flat, which is kind of where I thought it was. Here's streak 26. This one's kind of a tough one. With the Google recently updated their coverage, which is why the locations are missing. And they actually on the new Gen 4 car has an antenna now. Um, if I can pause on it, I'm panning too fast. Right here, it's Generation 4 car with an antenna, which is pretty rare. It used to only be in Turkey, but now it's in a lot of countries. And so this kind of threw me off on where it could be because I wasn't sure where that actually was. Um, the houses look kind of Belgian or Dutch to me with like the brick, or even UK, kind of with the brick and reddish colors, but I wasn't too sure. Thought it could have been Czechia, kind of by landscape feeling. But I end up going Netherlands, with literally the sole reason being that there's tons of windmills, and Netherlands kind of known for the windmills. There's a windmill there, and then there's that entire windmill farm I just panned by. So that's why I end up going Netherlands. It ends up being the north coast. Here's 27. Um, Super confused on this round, and it actually wasn't that hard on looking back. So I would think this is Indonesia, but we had a blue Generation 4 car, which you don't get in Indonesia, and the poles didn't have the Malaysian sticker that you classic. That's a classic in Malaysia. You get a sticker on the pole in Malaysia, so I thought it couldn't be Malaysia. They're not Thai poles. I actually end up convincing myself this is Generation 4 low cam in Sri Lanka. Um, Quite embarrassing. But it ends up just being Malaysia without the stickers. And honestly, that makes way more sense. But luckily, I end up missing the round after this too when I was playing through it. So I'm not too mad about missing it. It happens. 28 is only one better, so I end up getting 27. I end up guessing Sri Lanka here after like 2 minutes, and it's Malaysia. And it honestly, that was my first thought. But I kind of just psyched myself out. So yeah, so that's 27 streak, my personal best. Hopefully, I'll be able to get on the leaderboard soon and improve that. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe, and I hope to make more of these. So thank you for watching.